The day I told my evicted neighbor to move in with me, the whole hallway smelled like dust, old carpet, and heartbreak. Her life was packed into 3 torn suitcases and 2 black garbage bags. The landlord's voice had just faded down the stairwell, cold and official, like a judge's gavel echoing after a sentence. She stood there frozen, keys dangling from her trembling fingers, staring at a door that would never open for her again. And before I even understood what I was doing, I heard my own voice say the words that would change both our lives forever: move in with me. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that one small act can rewrite someone's future, take a second right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this remind us that compassion exists in every corner of the world. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore, and until that moment she had always been the quiet woman in apartment 3B. I was Daniel Hayes, the freelance graphic designer in 3A who kept odd hours and rarely spoke to anyone longer than a polite nod in the hallway. Eleanor had silver-threaded brown hair she tied back in a low bun, and eyes that always looked like they were holding back a storm. She used to water the hallway plants when the building manager forgot. She would pick up mail that slipped out of our boxes and place it carefully by our doors. She was the kind of neighbor you appreciated without ever truly knowing. But that afternoon, I saw her differently. The landlord had posted the eviction notice 2 weeks earlier. I had noticed it taped to her door but told myself it wasn't my business. People fall behind on rent all the time. It happens. Yet over those 2 weeks, I heard the sounds through the wall: drawers opening late at night, soft crying muffled by pillows, the scratch of pen against paper as she probably tried to calculate the impossible. I told myself she would figure it out. That someone would help her. That it wasn't my responsibility. Until no one came. When the landlord arrived with a locksmith and 2 men in gray uniforms, the hallway seemed too small to contain the humiliation. Eleanor didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply nodded, signed something with shaking hands, and began carrying her life out piece by piece. A framed photograph fell from one of her bags and the glass shattered. I watched from my doorway as she knelt to gather the shards, her fingers bleeding slightly, and something inside me cracked too. That was when I said it. Move in with me. She looked up at me as if I had just told a cruel joke. There was disbelief in her eyes, and something sharper: fear. She said it wasn't funny. Not in those exact words in this retelling, but in the way her shoulders stiffened, in the way her lips pressed together as if bracing for ridicule. I realized then how little the world had given her reason to trust kindness. I stepped closer. I told her I meant it. I told her I had a spare room. I told her she didn't have to decide forever, just for now. The words felt heavy but right, like placing the final stone in a bridge that had been waiting to be built. Eleanor had moved to the city 3 years earlier to take care of her younger sister, Margaret Whitmore, who had been battling a chronic autoimmune disease. Hospital bills had piled up. When Margaret passed away the previous winter, the medical debt did not pass with her. Eleanor had taken extra shifts at the bookstore downtown, skipped meals, sold her jewelry, and still it wasn't enough. Grief had already hollowed her out. The eviction was simply the final blow. At first, she refused. Pride is a powerful thing, especially when it is the only thing you feel you still own. But when the locksmith replaced the lock and the landlord handed her a final envelope, reality closed in around her. She had nowhere to go. No family nearby. No savings left. The city can be merciless when you fall through its cracks. I picked up one of her suitcases and walked toward my apartment. I didn't look back to see if she was following. I was afraid that if I did, I would see her walking away instead. But I heard the soft scrape of her bags against the floor behind me. The first week was awkward in the quietest way. My apartment was small, with peeling paint near the kitchen ceiling and a couch that had seen better days. I cleared out the spare room, which had been more of a storage space filled with half-finished projects and unopened boxes from my last move. Watching her place her belongings carefully in the closet felt strangely intimate, like witnessing someone rebuild themselves from scraps. We moved around each other like cautious strangers sharing a train compartment. She insisted on cooking to earn her keep, even though I told her it wasn't necessary. The smell of garlic and rosemary began to replace the stale scent of my usual takeout. For the first time in years, my dining table was used for more than a laptop stand. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Eleanor struggled with guilt. I could see it in the way she avoided sitting too long in the living room, as if she feared taking up space. She apologized constantly, for the water bill, for for the electricity, for the simple act of existing in my home. And I struggled with doubt. What if this was a mistake? What if I was overstepping? What if the building management found out and caused problems with my lease? The outside world didn't help. A neighbor down the hall, Gregory Thompson, made a passing comment about how quickly rumors spread in apartment buildings. I felt the sting of judgment in his smirk. Kindness, it seemed, always invited suspicion. One evening, I came home to find Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by rejection letters. She had been applying for better-paying jobs for weeks. Each letter was a polite variation of no. Her shoulders were slumped, and for the first time since she moved in, she looked utterly defeated. That night, she told me about Margaret in detail. About the hospital corridors, the beeping machines, the way her sister had tried to joke even when the pain was unbearable. Eleanor confessed that after Margaret died, she didn't know who she was anymore. Taking care of her sister had been her identity. Without that purpose, she felt untethered, drifting. I realized then that the eviction wasn't just about rent. It was about a woman who had lost everything that defined her. The change began slowly. I had a friend who ran a small marketing firm and needed part-time administrative help. I suggested Eleanor apply. She hesitated, convinced she wasn't qualified. But she went to the interview anyway, wearing the only blazer she hadn't sold. When she came home that afternoon, there was a flicker in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Hope. She got the job. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay a fortune, but it was steady. It was something. She started leaving the apartment each morning with purpose, her steps lighter. She began contributing to groceries despite my protests. She insisted on paying a small amount of rent once her first paycheck arrived. I accepted, not because I needed it, but because I understood what it meant to her dignity. Weeks turned into months. The spare room slowly transformed with small touches, plants on the windowsill, a quilt draped neatly over the bed, a framed photo of Margaret placed on the nightstand. Laughter started to echo in the apartment, tentative at first, then genuine. We developed routines. Sunday morning coffee on the fire escape, late-night conversations about dreams we had once buried. But the real transformation wasn't just hers. Before Eleanor moved in, my life had been defined by isolation disguised as independence. I worked alone, ate alone, and convinced myself I preferred it that way. Letting someone into my space forced me to confront my own loneliness. In helping her rebuild, I found pieces of myself I hadn't realized were broken. One evening, nearly 6 months after that day in the hallway, Eleanor handed me an envelope. Inside was a lease agreement for a small studio apartment across town. She had saved enough for a deposit. Her hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from pride. She told me she was ready. The night before she moved out, we sat on the fire escape watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain. I thought back to the image of her kneeling in the hallway, gathering broken glass with bleeding fingers. It felt like a lifetime ago. When she carried her suitcases out of my apartment the next morning, they looked lighter. Or maybe she did. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something special. Comment the word hope below if you believe that one act of courage can rewrite someone's future. Eleanor didn't just find a new apartment. She found her footing again. She eventually took on more responsibility at the marketing firm, and a year later she was promoted to office manager. She started volunteering at a local support group for families dealing with medical debt, determined to help others navigate what had once drowned her. As for me, I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your door. Not because you have all the answers, not because it's convenient, but because someone is standing in a hallway with nowhere else to go. The world can be harsh. It can strip people down to their last suitcase and dare them to survive. But every so often, someone chooses to interrupt that cruelty with compassion. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe a little more in humanity, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that remind us who we can be at our best. Your engagement helps these messages reach people who might be standing in their own hallway right now, waiting for a door to open. Because sometimes, the words "move in with me" aren't just an invitation to share a home. They're an invitation to share hope.